The first video game came out over 35 years ago. They've become more complex and detailed over the past several years. Today's typical video game includes some form of a violent objective, which usually results in a reward of blood and or gore. We have most definitely come a long way from trying to bounce a white ball from one side of the screen to the other. According to a national survey conducted by the National Institute on Media and the Family, 92% of children and adolescents ages 2 through 17 play video games. 9 out of 10 of the top 7 video games contain violence, and about half of all video games contain violence. Which brings me to my main claim, which is violent video games have a significantly negative effect on the overall well-being of children. I will be discussing 3 points in support of my main claim, which are 1, that playing violent video games can lead children to develop bad habits, 2, violent video games can instill a false perception of reality, and 3, that violent video games have negative effects on the mental state of a child. Returning to my first point, which is that playing violent video games can lead children to develop bad habits. These bad habits include, but are not limited to, less time devoted to studies and the development of aggression. According to Kaiser Family Foundation, a study found that 1 in 4 children acknowledge that video games sometimes do interfere with homework and academic performance. According to psychologists Douglas Gentile and Craig Anderson, it is likely that violent video games may have even stronger effects on children's aggression because 1, the games are highly engaging and addictive. The games reward violent behavior, and 3, because children repeat these behaviors over and over as they play. On average, boys play 13 hours a week, and girls play 5 hours a week. A study conducted by researchers at Stanford University School of Medicine found that reducing the time spent watching TV and playing video games to under 7 hours a week decreased verbal aggression by 50% and physical aggression by 40% among 3rd and 4th graders. According to another article by the Kaiser Family Foundation, a study was done with over 4,000 participants, and 46% of these participants were under the age of 18. The study found that playing video games significantly increases physiological arousal and feelings of anger or hatred, and significantly decreases pro-social helping behavior. And I'll move on to my second supporting point, which is that violent video games can instill a false perception of reality. According to an article by CNN Health, Dr. L. Rowell Huseman, director of the Research Center for Group Dynamics at the University of Michigan's Institute for Social Research, states that there are 2 ways violent media can lead people to violent actions. The first is through imitation. He says that children who watch violence in the media can begin to believe that the world around them is hostile, which leads them to feel that acting aggressively is an acceptable way of dealing with it. The second is that kids become desensitized to violence. Dr. Huseman also states that when you are exposed to violence day in and day out, it loses its emotional impact on you. He believes that once you have become emotionally numb to violence, it's much easier to engage in it. My last point is that violent video games have negative effects on the mental state of a child. Again, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation, half of 7th through 12th graders play video games by themselves. This is clearly not beneficial for their social development. According to Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman, a retired Army psychologist, video games teach the skill and will to kill. He believes that we are teaching children to associate pleasure with human death and suffering. We are rewarding them for killing people, and we are teaching them to like it. Thus, violent video games do have a great influence over the youth of today and are affecting them in more negative ways than positive. Yes, there are some researchers that believe that video games are the training wheels for computer literacy. However, this statement is overshadowed by the greater negative effects these games have on children. They can lead children to develop bad habits, instill false perceptions of reality, and have negative effects on the mental state of a child. I hope that I've convinced you that violent video games do have a negative effect on the overall well-being of children. Thank you.
All right. Well, the Structure of the speech is excellent. It's very easy to follow. You've got a clear statement of what your proposition is. You lay out what the supporting claims are. You're signposting them as you go through. On each of the individual points, you're doing a pretty good job about citing evidence and information. You've got some research studies that you're citing. You've got some authorities whose expertise you qualify. You've got some hypothetical examples that you're talking about. The thing that I think is a little bit problematic is that you explain the theory very well, and the experts support the theory. There's not much demonstration that, in fact, the theory is operational in the real world or that it's had any impact. So, for instance, if there was some statistical basis for believing that kids act more violently other than what we see in a study, if we saw an increase in the number of incidents among those 7th graders who play video games by themselves, for instance, or if we had more incorrigible children and there was some way of associating that with the video games, I think your conclusion would be a little bit stronger. But I thought you did a very good job kind of explaining the basics of the argument and clarifying the theory and explaining the underlying assumptions. End.